Protests, vandalism, and violence once again take center stage in Seattle.
In recent days, we have seen fires on the streets, businesses covered in spray paint, and windows smashed. And police have placed nearly a dozen people in handcuffs. We have watched that unrest play out night after night since Wednesday. And now Seattle's interim police chief is calling for action.
KOMO's Kara Kosnich joins us live tonight with interim chief Adrian Diaz's message for vandals and looters. Kara, the chief was direct.
He was very direct, Michelle. Bottom line, he says you break the law. Be prepared to be held accountable.
The violence and lawbreaking need to stop.
After days of violent and destructive protests through the streets of Seattle,
These calls for change are being drowned out by relentless violence, mayhem, and illegal behavior.
the city's top cop putting looters and vandals on notice.
The violence has to stop, and we need every member of this community to demand this end as well.
Over the last few nights, windows broken, fires set, officers assaulted, and explosives tossed at buildings and at cops. Mayor Jenny Durkan released a statement tonight that says, in part, I plead with protesters to remain peaceful, reject those in their midst setting fires and endangering others, and heed Seattle Police Department's dispersal warnings.
I want to make sure that we don't draw all of our resources to handle this and forget that there is actually crime that occurs throughout this city.
But that happened last night when street racers spun their wheels for nearly 2 hours. It happened just outside Seattle Center. Multiple people were struck by this Mustang. It took Seattle police 90 minutes to arrive.
In the next literally 3 days, we will have those personnel back into patrol, being able to respond to calls for service.
Chief Adrian Diaz says SPD is working with the city, county, and federal partners to make sure those engaging in criminal behavior will be held fully accountable.
If there is people that are going out and peacefully protesting, we'll help facilitate that peaceful protest. But if they're coming to create this mayhem, we're going to address this mayhem.
And the chief says 100 officers will be moving back into the patrol unit to deal with some of these issues Seattle is facing. Live at KOMO Plaza tonight, I'm Kara Kosnich, KOMO News.
Kara, thank you very much. And as she mentioned regarding those protests, Mayor Durkan released a statement tonight. She offered support for peaceful protest, but denounced the violence and destruction. Again, in her statement, she pleads with protesters to remain peaceful. The mayor said this: she will continue to work with the chief and the city's departments to engage in, quote, the type of transformative and systemic change that peaceful protesters are rightfully demanding.
Because of the recent protests, vandalism, and how things have escalated, some people told us they avoid Seattle's Capitol Hill at night after the sun goes down.
I don't know at what point it is, but it does turn to a place that is sort of the center of all of the protests at night. When spray painting starts happening, or or it just starts to escalate a little bit where the police get involved, we are in our apartment far away.
From COVID-19 to crime to protests, Seattle is in the spotlight across the country. And now some say recent protests and riots are hurting the city's image. Groups like Visit Seattle say they plan to launch an $8 million campaign next month to target local and regional visitors.
People are saying there's nothing left in downtown. Even the councilman we were recently talking to is disturbed about the disintegration of downtown. Over 100 stores closed. Columbia Sportswear closed. Macy's.
Campaign we talked about from Visit Seattle is paid for using money from the federal coronavirus stimulus bill.
But first, people around Seattle spent the day cleaning up after demonstrations turned destructive. Good evening, I'm Lindsay Sheldon. Around this time yesterday, we saw protesters in the streets defying a police order to disperse after violent clashes. And as KOMO 7's Deborah Horn shows us, the Seattle Police Department's chief is now asking citizens to step up and help end the destruction.
After 4 straight nights of this, peaceful protests that turned violent just as night falls, Seattle's interim police chief says he has seen enough.
The violence and lawbreaking need to stop. I'm asking every member of this community to join me in this call.
Chief Diaz spoke as his department released new body camera video showing what officers have faced night after violent night. He says protesters have been deliberately targeting officers, extensively damaging private property, setting numerous fires, leading to more than 24 arrests.
To those paying attention, these calls for change are being drowned out by relentless violence, mayhem, and illegal behavior.
Seattle's Capitol Hill has taken the brunt of the violence. To be sure, many here say they are sympathetic to the peaceful protests for racial equity, have even participated in some of them, but they don't support this.
I think it's a bunch of mess, and really when you're protesting for anybody, that, hey, look, you got to understand what you're protesting for and not damaging or what you're living in. The situation that you're in, you're making it worse for yourself.
And I think that is counterproductive when it comes to the cause. Like, say, for instance, the church over here, they had the windows broke. That church fed everybody in this park, like last summer.
What do you think about what's been happening?
This is nonsense. This, I swear, is nonsense.
The interim police chief made a point of highlighting one arrest, a 19-year-old Kirkland man booked for arson. He is one of several people suspected of setting dumpsters on fire on Capitol Hill. He is in the King County Jail being held without bail. I expect he'll be in court tomorrow afternoon. Reporting in downtown Seattle, Deborah Horn, Cairo 7 News.
In Louisville, Kentucky, protesters pushed back against an overnight curfew. They gathered outside a downtown church last night, many chanting Breonna Taylor's name. The church has offered refuge to demonstrators during the curfew. And earlier today, a different Louisville church held a vigil for Breonna Taylor. People renewed rallies in her name here and around the country when this past week, a Kentucky grand jury chose not to bring direct charges against officers in her killing. In Portland, Oregon, 30 protesters were arrested overnight after hundreds gathered near the city's Justice Center. The state's governor brought in state troopers and deputies yesterday in anticipation of clashes between opposing groups. But one rally by the far-right Proud Boys saw a much lower turnout than expected. The arrest came hours later when police declared an unlawful assembly as protesters blocked roads. And it's not just protests. Police are now also focused on another dangerous trend, specifically cars spinning donuts as large crowds cheer them on. This happened last night, again, at the Space Needle.
This has to stop. Someone is going to get seriously injured or killed. This almost happened last night. The people organizing these events have to stop.
Last night's incident is the latest in a string of what police call stunt shows. Early this past week, Cairo 7 reported on the problem that's only gotten worse with so many empty streets and parking lots due to this pandemic. You can see how close the cars come to hitting people in some of these cases. SPD says police were delayed getting to the illegal show last night because so many officers were assigned to protests on Capitol Hill. Police have arrested people at other so-called stunt shows, but no arrests were made last night. Officers say despite the dozens of people who were there last night, no one wanted to talk to police or provide any information.
Another weekend of chaos and fires in Seattle. The police chief says this unlawful behavior needs to end. But what impact is the violence and the vandalism having on Seattle's reputation? Tonight, Q13's Jennifer Lee is in Snohomish County asking people what they think about the downtown destruction.
Fires started night after night. Injuries seen to both police officers and people on the street. This weekend's protest bringing destruction to City Hall and Columbia Tower. The aftermath is a broken city.
I'm sad about Seattle because people talk so badly about it.
Susie Maxwell believes it's people who aren't from Seattle that are moving in with an agenda.
The protest is real. The protest is correct, I feel, because of all the deaths by police officers. Most of the people, 90-some% of the people that are causing the problem are from outside.
On Sunday, Seattle Police Chief Adrian Diaz says the department has seen groups publicly write their mission is to disrupt policing, whether it's tying up resources or putting the department in further spending.
We cannot do this work by creating a new model of community safety while fires burn in our streets. Windows are breaking, officers are injured every night, and community members are placed at risk. This is not what Seattle is all about, and this is not who we want to be.
Karma and Joey Lee are small business owners who run a shop called Bobay in Woodinville. They say from the outside looking in, there appears to be no real winner.
I have to say I am a little scared every time I want to go down. You never know what's going on. I do think what's happening right now is important, but I have seen a lot of business down there also suffering. It's like a ghost town.
Our heart goes out to all our brothers and sisters out in downtown Seattle that have to endure not only COVID, but all these ransacks, all these things that they are going through in terms of a security purpose ways.
Chief Diaz says the right to protest will be protected, but it's time to put an end to the unlawful and criminal behavior on the streets. And for that to happen, he says it'll take the whole community. In Seattle, Jennifer Lee, Q13 News.
Chief Diaz acknowledged that more officers are needed to respond to other crime issues. He says in the next few days, 100 officers will be moved back into patrol to respond to calls for service.